This is part two of the crucial importance of enforcing the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the key to world peace and prosperity. Hello, my name is Edward Sonino. Here are excerpts of some of the 30 articles of the Declaration, with comments pointing out egregious violations by various member states and the historical origins of many human rights violations. Article 2, I quote, "Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status." This provision is regularly violated as a matter of public policy by nations not granting women equal rights, such as many Islamic nations. As for the United States, had we faithfully observed the Declaration from the day it was adopted in December 1948, racial segregation in some of our southern states would have ended immediately and not lasted into the 1960s. Article 4. I quote, "No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms." Shamefully and tragically, the provisions of this article continue to be violated to this day. There has been no serious effort to eradicate human trafficking and the treatment of many workers, including children, as virtual slaves in many developing countries. What many people do not realize is that slavery was institutionalized and validated by the monotheistic religions, starting with the Old Testament and Moses' laws, and followed up by the New Testament and the Quran, neither of which condemned or prohibited slavery. Just think of it. If Moses and Jesus Christ had condemned and repudiated slavery, there would have been no slavery in the United States. Moses instead communicated God's laws and regulations on slavery to the Israelites, while Jesus only mentioned slavery to tell his followers what would happen to disobedient slaves. To a modern mind, the morality of the Universal Declaration is clearly superior to the morality of monotheism's holy books in multiple instances, not just on the issue of slavery. It should be recognized that many human rights violations throughout history and up till the present day have their origin in the Bible and the Quran, which institutionalized them, validated them, and incited and commanded them, including religious discrimination, religious censorship, religious violence, gender discrimination, and torture. Had Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad condemned, repudiated, and prohibited religious discrimination, there never would have been religious discrimination by Jews, Christians, or Muslims. There never would have been the Catholic Church's inquisitions. There never would have been the Holocaust. There never would be Islamic terrorism or death fatwas against writers or cartoonists. Article 5. I quote, "No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment." End quote. Torture, tragically, has been validated and institutionalized by monotheism's holy books, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. Had Moses, Jesus Christ, and Muhammad condemned, repudiated, and prohibited torture, there would have been infinitely fewer instances of torture committed by monotheistic believers. Moses' laws included commands to torture through stoning or burning to death, while Jesus and Muhammad explained that their God would torture countless human beings in hell for eternity just for the sake of punishment. The thought process of many believers has been the following: if torture was okay for Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, and if God himself tortures, then believers are entitled to torture guilty, offending human beings. Inspired by the Bible, the Catholic Church itself committed outrageous organized torture during the Inquisition and Spanish Inquisition years. Currently, the Islamic extremist organization ISIS or ISIL outrageously tortures in the name of Islam and the Quran, following the Quran's explicit commands and incitements against the infidels. Article 13, Paragraph 1. Everyone has the rights to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. Paragraph 2. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. End quote. Notoriously, most of the communist member states, such as the Soviet Union and China, violated these human rights as a matter of public policy. Cuba still does, as does North Korea. Article 16, 2. Quote, marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. End quote. This human right continues to be violated by many nations where arranged marriages are common. Article 17, 1. Everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. 2. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. End quote. These human rights were violated by all the communist nations as a matter of public policy. Article 18, I quote, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. These human rights continue to be violated openly by many member states and officially by the religion of Islam, by specifically prohibiting Muslims from leaving their religion under penalty of death, the case of apostasy, and by its treatment of non-Muslims, such as the infidels. Article 19, I quote, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. End quote. Communist member states such as the Soviet Union notoriously violated these human rights as a matter of public policy, and these rights continue to be violated by present-day Russia, China, Cuba, and North Korea, as well as by Islamic nations which impose strict religious censorship. Notoriously, the supreme leader of Iran, the former supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Khomeini, issued a transnational death fatwa against the British author Salman Rushdie, a resident of England, for having written a novel which Iranian Muslim authorities found blasphemous. That fatwa not only violated the Universal Declaration, which Iran pledged to uphold as a member of the United Nations, it also violated international law and Britain's sovereignty and was a criminal act outside of Iran's jurisdiction. Unfortunately, no action of any consequence was taken by the United Nations to enforce the Universal Declaration, and that served to encourage future violations of human rights by Muslims. In fact, Muslim extremists have subsequently murdered French journalists for expressing criticism of Islam's intolerance and violations of human rights, and attempted to murder Danish political cartoonists for their critical portrayal of Islam and Muslims. It must be understood by all religious believers that blasphemy is exclusively a religious violation, having no standing in secular democracies embracing human rights and freedom of speech. Criticism of religions is protected as freedom of speech by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and by the laws of all human rights respecting democracies. Religious believers must accept and respect that. They should not try to impose their religion's laws in countries respecting human rights, either through violence or intimidation. For too long, only lip service at most has been given to human rights in many member states. Not defending the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is worse than not having it, by breeding cynicism and contempt for human rights, and also for the United Nations and its member nations, which are all pledged to uphold the Declaration but have not lived up to their promises. What's urgently needed is a high-profile public relations and education campaign worldwide, promoted by the United Nations and all member states truly believing in human rights. If we are serious about having human rights universally respected, upheld, and defended, the United Nations must unwaveringly enforce its Universal Declaration and severely censure member states violating its provisions and not teaching the Declaration to all their citizens. Those nations refusing to teach the Universal Declaration and the history of human rights violations in an honest and unbiased manner should have their voting rights revoked and then be expelled from the United Nations, just like those nations who violate human rights systematically. The United States and the Western democracies should promptly set the example by having human rights taught in all their high schools and by including the Universal Declaration and the history of human rights violations in their high school graduation exams. Another important measure would be to require all new presidents and prime ministers of member nations to go on TV and radio in prime time upon taking office and personally pledge to uphold the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then read out loud the Charter's introductory resolution and Articles 1 and 2, followed by reading the entire Universal Declaration. In addition, the UN should proclaim an annual United Nations Day and require such pledges and readings by all presidents and prime ministers every year on United Nations Day on TV and radio in prime time. For world peace and economic and social prosperity, the United Nations must finally fulfill its invaluable mission and its great promise. It would be a good idea to schedule a special, world televised United Nations meeting with Russian President Putin, Chinese President Xi, and President Obama side by side, taking turns reading out loud the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then shake hands while promising the world that they will cooperate to uphold the UN's principles. The leaders of the Israelis and the Palestinians should do the same. Thanks for your attention.